Welcome to Election Island, where we will be reacting to the local elections. I'm Curtis Daly, and in a second, we'll be joined by our panel to go through these results and make sense of it and what it means for the future of British politics. Now, the headline of the elections is the Reform Party making huge gains. They were the largest party in terms of vote share. They won the most council seats and have clearly boosted their momentum. Labour, as expected, had a terrible showing across the boards. I think we got a graphic to show that. So if you look at this, we've got the vote share. 30% for Reform. 30%. And if you look at it in 2024, Labour on 34% and, of course, Reform on 0. So that is a massive seismic shift. And these are the results for the council elections. Reform with 643 councillors. The Liberal Democrats, 365. Conservatives, 304. Oh, Labour, 91, and they lost 103. Independents together got 88. The Greens, 77, up from 44. That's really astonishing, isn't it? And these are the mayoral results. We've got Paul Bristow, the Conservative, the lone Conservative that won his race. Labour got 3, Ross Jones, Karen Clark and Helen Goodwin. Reform picked up 2. Luke Campbell, he's the ex-World Championship boxer, if you don't know him already. And Andrea Jenkins, we all know her. Note that there's no Greens, despite West of England, being in their sights. Now, also held yesterday was the Runcorn by-election, with Reform winning another Member of Parliament, beating out Labour by 6 votes. It was Labour's 16th safest seat. But we're going to go to the panel and we're going to discuss these results. Now, joining me on the panel to go through these results is Cog, Lewis and Callum. Lewis, I'm going to go to you first. Reform swept the board. It was a tough night for Labour, but it was also a drubbing for the Tories. Actually, if you look at the numbers, it was a far worse night for the Tories. But of course, the headlines are Reform does good, Labour are the party in government, they were the losers.
Yeah, so obviously we can't deny the success that Reform have had, especially from the size of the party that they were to what they are now. Obviously, their voters are going to be very excited over this. However, I always like to remind people at local elections that this is not a general. The voter base who turn out are always the older voters. Obviously, we have a problem with younger people voting at both general and local elections, but especially at the local elections. But obviously, this is going to make a big shock to both major parties, right? We were living in a system for a very long time of, the two major parties constantly battling back and forth. And Reform have done what no small party have managed to do in literally decades and come in and actually turn the system up on its head. Interestingly enough, obviously, it's making a lot of the major parties move more right-wing, which I'm sure many of us can talk about a little bit later on in terms of the impact on Reform coming in general. But I think the biggest thing that I'm looking at when it comes to this is the first past the post system, because you can truly see these splits across some of these vote shares across different elections. And obviously Reform have had some slam dunks, right? They had one of the Lincolnshire mayor one, they got about 42%, but some of the mayoral races, like the person who came in first is at 25% in some of them. So I'm not looking forward to a future where we're going to be having, 3 potentially major parties battling it out, where one party could potentially come into power with 25 to 30% of the vote. Obviously, Labour already pushed that in the general, right, in 2024 with 33.6, was it? I can't remember. So let's just say 33. And Reform are now going to squeeze that even further, and it's just going to cause more splits in the country.
We're going to talk about the smaller parties in a second, because there's a lot to talk about. But for now, we'll look at Labour and Reform. Callum, we've had Morgan McSweeney tell his insiders that the blue Labour approach, is the right way to go. And for those that don't know what the blue Labour approach is, it's this idea that you tack left economically and tack right socially. The problem, though, is that they're not even doing Blue Labour because they're gone to the right on the economy. But anyway, they think that actually this strategy is working, or at least it's going to work. What do you make of the fact that insiders, after an absolute drubbing, that they're not going to change course?
In 2021, Labour suffered a massive defeat in the local elections, and they had roughly 300 councils that they 300 councillors and seats in the councils that they got. It was so bad that Keir Starmer at the time was considering whether or not he should resign. Of those 300 or so seats that they held on to, or at least of those ones that were up for grabs yesterday, they've got, 94, according to the most recent figures? So, to me, it's a resignation issue. If he was going to resign as leader of the opposition when he got down to 300 seats, if he's the prime minister and if he can only barely hold on to 94, someone's got to go. This idea that Labour need to move to the right it's driving me insane. I've had a number of conversations with people about this today. Starmer said this morning that he'd listened to the people, and that he realises that Labour need to go further, and they need to go harder and further, I think are the words that he used. And it's insane. Pandering to the right wing isn't going to help them. It hasn't helped them. I mean, look at the results today. Why would people vote for the Labour Party if they're offering, Reform Light, when they could just vote for Nigel Farage's party and get Nigel Farage? It just makes no sense to me. On the wider results as well, I think Reform have surprised even themselves, I think, today. You'll remember all the rhetoric a few weeks, well, it was quite a while now back, about these cancelled elections and how Labour have stolen democracy because they're cancelling all these council elections in areas where Reform are going to do really well. And I think Reform were expecting to do all right, but they were expecting that these seats will be ones that they probably wouldn't have a massive amount of success with, maybe a couple of hundred councillors or whatever. And then they could turn around and say, see, this is why Labour didn't want us to stand for election in these other areas where we're definitely going to win. And actually what's happened is they've absolutely wiped the floor with everybody. And, they're in control. My last count, they were controlling 7 councils. I think it's about 8 or 9 now, at least. They have won seats that I don't think even they expected to win. And what happened in Runcorn, my God, I don't know if anyone else watching was watching it through the night, but at one point they announced that they were getting ready to announce it. They all huddled, everyone was running around, and the one of the candidates from the Monster Raving Loony Party was wandering around going, and it was everyone back and forth, and they were like, we think there's 4 votes in it. That's what we think's being said. And that was the case. Labour were behind by four votes. They did a recount. They found Reform 2 more votes, and a number of hours later after the recount, Reform won. But something that is very clear to me, very clear, and this is why what you were talking about, Curtis, about Labour's move to the right, this is why this is a nonsense policy and a nonsense thing to do. The majority of people voted for parties that were not Reform. It's the same old with us having a stupid system that doesn't work, because when you look at that, I mean, if you look at Runcorn and Helsby had 15 candidates standing, right? 15 candidates. Across those 15, Reform won by 6 votes to Labour. So once you've tallied up all the other people that voted for any of the other any of the other 13 candidates, the majority of people in Runcorn and Helsby voted for parties that were not Reform UK. And that has been the case up and down the country. But because of the way our political system works, like Lewis alluded to earlier, talking about, some mayors being elected on 25% of the vote share, we're ending up in this situation where we're getting right wing, we're getting Reform. And if Labour move more towards the right, we're just going to see even more of that. People don't want the Reform UK. They don't want right-wing policies. But because Labour are pushing away and alienating their normal voters, they've already made it clear that they don't want anyone that supported Corbyn or anyone remotely on the left of the party to be involved with the party. And I think they're now starting to alienate the centre as well. There's a lot of people that I would classes, neoliberal centrists who are really angry and have also had enough of the way that the Labour Party's going. So, if that's what they want to do, Blue Labour, keep it going. Nigel Farage will be PM in 4.5 years.
Cog, obviously, these results for Labour are pretty catastrophic. What is unprecedented, though, is that usually we've got two of the main parties, Labour or the Conservative. One of them becomes really, really unpopular, and the other one sort of gains from that. What we're now seeing, though, is that both Labour and the Conservatives are deeply, deeply unpopular. Now, obviously, the Labour Party won the 2024 general election because people didn't want the Conservatives anymore. Now, people are angry at the Labour Party. They're not going to go back to the Conservatives, are they? Because they're angry. So now we have a situation where, and the results reflects that, where actually the Conservatives had the biggest losses. This kind of echoes what Zach Blansky and Natalie Bennett, Carla Denyer said, that this is actually a 5-horse race. But this is under first past the post. We don't even have PR, and yet we have all these options, essentially.
Yeah, we there's a lot to learn, I think, from last night, and I think one of the things is that we are now living in a multi-party system. Of course, this hasn't been really tested at a general election very much. It might be that people default to the two main parties come general election. I suspect that might not be the case, and there's a couple of reasons why I think that might not be the case. The first is that Labour are losing out. But they are losing out to the Greens and the Lib Dems, yes, a little bit. But the Greens and Lib Dems, in my opinion, less so the Lib Dems, more the Greens, kind of underperformed. Like, I want the Greens to do well. Like, I really want the Greens to do well. But there was an element of, like, kind of underperforming in these elections. And I was hoping that they were going to gain more. But the biggest thing for me, and the thing that I was trying to work out, was what is voter turnout like? Because I think that Keir Starmer is going to walk away from these elections with entirely the wrong message. Reform are coming second. We need to be more like Reform. That is my biggest worry with what Starmer is going forward, and it's going to sort of represent going forward. Just touching on Reform's electoral successes, though, Salvation put out some interesting analysis saying that Runcorn is a seat with a similar profile to around 60 to 100 other MPs seats. Similar demographics, similar sort of spread of opinion, and there's 60 to 100 seats that sort of fit that profile. And Reform now have a launching base, right? They've worked out their strategy, because if it works in a sort of like, well, it's a by-election and we'll sort of like, we're not putting our all into this yet because we're testing strategies. I'm thinking come the general election, they're going to have nailed this stuff down and Keir Starmer is going to feel it a lot more. I'd also like to echo what you've already said about Keir Starmer having the wrong priorities. It was interesting to me. I was looking at Ground News, who split their stories. They link you to news articles and they show you what the right are saying and what the left are saying. And it was interesting to me that the Daily Express was saying that Starmer had lost due to winter fuel cuts. It was welfare cuts. So winter fuel, welfare, and the third one, and the one that was interesting, immigration, right? But most of what I was seeing from either left-wing organisations or people on the door was saying that the people who said they were going to vote Labour but didn't generally weren't saying anything about immigration. Mm-hmm. They were being lost on the points of winter fuel cuts and disability benefits. They seem to be the two big deciding factors, because Labour are supposed to be the party with like heart and with compassion, and they've come across as being cruel. Just to like underline that point, I noted that the BBC chief political correspondent Henry Zeffman, he said shortly after the results were announced, I was talking to one Labour campaigner who was leaving. They said to me on every door it was the same story: winter fuel and benefit cuts. I think that's where Labour are losing their support. But I think Keir Starmer's going to walk away. What was the phrase he used? Something about going harder and faster. He said
Harder and farther, I think.
Farther and faster. That was it. Yeah,
Very, very
farther
fast.
and faster. So he said he wants to go farther and faster for the change that people want to see after. This was after Runcorn specifically, and that to me says he's going to crack down harder on immigration.
I want to ask though, do you think that
Yeah, go for it.
we are political commentators that don't get paid for our work, right? You've got people like Morgan McSweeney who get paid a lot of money to strategize. Surely they know that the fact that they're abandoning class issues and material issues is going to hurt them, but they just choose not to do it. Because I suspected, and what came up on the doorstep, which is being reported, is that the biggest things people hated about the Labour Party under Keir Starmer was the winter fuel payments, which is the biggest disaster policy I think I can think of in the last 10, 20 years, I don't know. And of course, cuts to disability, right? And the thing is that also echoes what I was saying, that I don't think that most reform voters think that immigration is their number one issue. I think it's class, it's material conditions, because they're just human beings like the rest of us. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, you want to make sure that your life is as best as possible, right? They're not suddenly these different caliber of people. But surely they must know this, but they're happy to ignore it and just try and pivot on immigration because, and I think this is definitely true of the Democrats in the USA, and this is a question actually for everyone, that they rather lose and keep their donors intact than potentially win and change the Labour Party that stands up for ordinary people rather the billionaire class. Because I think the Democrats, if you ask me, they would rather lose an election but keep the party as it is, the corporate party, intact than win. Because I find it almost impossible to believe that they can't understand that like winter fuel payments and disability cuts are really unpopular, and these are the things that aren't working, not the fact that they're not right-wing enough on immigration.
Just to quickly jump in as well while you're talking about the Democrats, right? Because this actually ties back to Morgan McSweeney. I remember reading some reporting from literally months ago, and they're petrified of what happened in the US. And there's this analysis of what happened in the US between Harris and Trump, which is constantly wrong. It's like the one thing like I would really question the media on when it comes to this type of analysis, because sometimes when it comes to their analysis on why people win and lose elections, it's good. This time across the board, it's terrible. They still say to this day that she lost because she was too left and she was too woke. And this is what really frustrates me, because I followed that campaign every single day. She shied away from her identity. Yeah. She has shied away from being woke and left, and she was only painted through that picture. And that's part of the reason why Trump won, right? There was the famous $100 million that he spent on the trans ad, which is, she's for, I'm for you. She's for they, them, and I'm for you. Yeah. And they've got this idea that by appearing to be too left is what made Harris lose. And I think this is what they're going with. And there's been a lot of reporting on this is what Morgan McSweeney has been talking about when it comes to the people that they network with in the US. This is the reason why Harris lost. And it's a complete joke. It's not why she lost at all. It's because she was painted in that way, not because she was that way. So they're almost like giving in to the right-wing narrative, which, what have we been saying for months about Labour? They are giving in to the right-wing narrative.
Well, we had Labour together, John Ashworth and that, go over to America to assist. They're like, oh, we won an election despite it being really, really unpopular. They got hardly any votes compared to the size of the majority. So you shouldn't be taking lessons from them. It was a complete failure of the Conservative Party. They go over and Labour together poisons the Labour Party and destroys the Democrat Party because they were saying you need to be tougher on immigration. You also need to be more reactionary on trans rights, for example. And that ad where it was, she's for they, them, and we're for you, whatever. Like, they would have ran that ad even if the Democrats had the exact same social policy as the Republicans. And it's going to be the same over here. I've made this point on the show so many times, but I think it's worth mentioning again that no matter how right-wing Labour go on immigration, for example, they're always going to be seen as the pro-immigration party. So no matter how much they capitulate, Nigel Farage is going to go, they're for open borders. So instead of doing that, I'm like, well, maybe just defend migration whilst also saying, here's what we're going to do to change your life to offset that. Because look, I think it's quite clear that we live in a country where most people want to see immigration come down. I know we don't agree with that kind of politics, right? But if you can say, look, we're going to defend migration, but our core message is about reducing inequality, like offering retail policies. I think people are willing to actually let that go if you're going to say to them, I'm going to make you better off. But if you, in the absence of any material policies, and then the right wing say, therefore open borders, and then Labour try and capitulate to the right on immigration, keeping immigration in the frame, in the debate, then they're never going to win.
There's a big problem here though, and it's the elephant in the room. And Red Labour shared a tweet on Facebook earlier today from a guy called Daniel Grigg, who said, "Admitting this isn't working means admitting Jeremy Corbyn was right. Keir Starmer will never do it." And I think that's what it boils down to, is that they probably do know that actually the things that are going to help them out are the more socialist policies. It is making sure that we've got equality for all. It's making sure that people that are in dire need of help and support get that help and support, whether it's through disability, whether it's lifting the 2-child benefit cap, whether it's making sure pensioners are warm in the winter, all the things that Labour don't seem to care about at the moment. But in order to we've got to remember that the people that are running the Labour Party right now are the same people who worked tirelessly to undermine the Corbyn leadership at every possible turn. And if they suddenly change tack now and they go back to doing what they need to do, they have to admit that they got it wrong, and they're not going to do that. But there's also a part of me that thinks that they genuinely believe that people care about immigration as much as they claim that they do. Because it is a topic that comes up all the time. Even when I was out in Runcorn and Helsby the other week talking to people, most people mentioned immigration, but a lot of people, including many of the people that weren't the 5 that would allow me to interview them on camera, they mentioned immigration, but they did also mention all of those other things. They mentioned the cuts to PIP and disability benefit. They talked about the way that pensioners had been treated with the winter fuel allowance. Some of them even talked about the fact that they weren't happy that they weren't getting rid of the 2-child benefit cap. So they talked about all those issues as well. But then they still said they were voting for reform. And I think what's happened is they see reform as this anti-establishment party, which is really ironic when you look at who makes up Reform UK Limited. But
Limited.
But they see them as somehow this anti-establishment party, when you literally have the Green Party, who gets no funding from anywhere, but to be honest, even if you want to call the Greens the establishment because of how long they've been, and I think that's the problem, they see the Greens as the establishment because of how long they've been in the system. But you've got a load of independent candidates. You've got, you could have voted for, the Monster Raving Loony Party if you really wanted to, as I think about 70 people did, or whatever silly number it was. There are other alternatives. So I can't quite work why they're all going for reform. But yeah, I think Labour are actually, I think it's 2 things. I think they don't want to admit that they got it wrong with Corbyn, and they genuinely believe that actually going harder and farther on immigration is going to fix the problem.
I mean, look, I sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Take over me in a second, but I just want to quickly say, you cannot convince everyone on every issue, right? It's very, very unlikely a political party can change people's minds on immigration. I don't think in 5 years, one political party can make a majority of people want to see immigration come down. So actually, I'm fine with what it is. But I do think you can get people to kind of not fixate on it. So an example I've got is the 2019 general election, right? It was dubbed the Brexit election, and all of the domestic policies fell by the wayside, right? Despite the fact that the domestic policies of the Labour Party were incredibly popular. Now, in 2017, what was the focus of the election? It was completely focused on domestic policies. You'll remember, obviously, nationalisation from Labour, but you remember the dementia tax from Theresa May. So when the popular stuff was allowed to sort of express itself in the political arena, people were listening to that. Now, Labour's immigration policy didn't really change that much. I mean, obviously, in terms of freedom of movement after the EU, sure, that did change, but that's just the EU, not immigration overall. But people listened to the policies they liked. And I would say if the Labour Party started offering retail policies that people like, they don't even need to go right on immigration. They'll just say, these are our front and centre policies. And people might go, I don't really like Labour's immigration policy, but Reform actually don't have an economic policy. They don't have a plan. But if I vote Labour, I'm actually going to get this. That's the way I see it. Sorry, Lewis, I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say, like, I want to go back to the topic that we often bring up, which is like we need more populism, but
Yes.
populism that's actually going to deliver. Keir Starmer has had so many opportunities to be a populist, and so the other party should be doing this as well, because we like the Greens. I think we've got some warmth to the Lib Dems and some of their policies. However, like, none of them are really offering actual fundamental change. And obviously, we can argue about, like, yeah, there are good policies which would be transformative in many ways, but no one's really offering fundamental change, and none of them are really telling a story, right? Can you imagine with the Lords reforms that Labour want to do, right? They're not even selling it. And obviously, we can talk about comms, but can you imagine how different it would be if Keir Starmer was up there on stage saying, "Do you really think that we should have anybody who's born into their role? Do you born to legislate? Do you know what I mean? Just make it more like interesting, make it more angry, make it more popular, right?"
Lewis, sorry to interrupt you, he went out today and talked about Ukraine. He went out today after losing all the fucking seats that he had left, and he talked about Ukraine.
I don't actually know. The thing is, though, he does get a lot of positive points for his international stuff. He is seen positively there, so I understand.
When he said, oh yeah, we're listening to the people, we're listening to all these people that have gone to reform because they're angry with us, and then he makes the first time he does like a proper conference, a proper speech on the same day, he dedicates the whole thing to talking about Ukraine. And don't get me wrong, it's an important issue. Great, fine, we want to support Ukraine. Brill, let's talk about that. But not today. Like, he could have used that to talk about so many social domestic issues that are affecting people, and to say, and you know what he could have done? He could have even said, you know what, we hear you, we hear that you're angry, and as a direct result of today, you know what we're going to do? We're going to scrap the 2-child benefit cap. We're going to reverse our cuts to the winter fuel allowance, and we're going to reconsider what we do about PIP and disability benefit. And he could have said, this is us listening to you.
I'm going to have to go Callum, though, on this one, because I think that obviously Ukraine is important, but if I'm honest, the praise he gets, I think mostly comes from the establishment media. Like, people on the ground, they'll say stuff like, they're not particularly like anti-Ukraine, but they'll say like, why are we giving endless money to Ukraine while we can't even afford to pay our pensioners? And then obviously the message is he's in Ukraine saying, we're listening to you. And then obviously he's not, because they're not going to reverse policy. They're not going to do that. I mean, even Rachel Reeves was asked about it, and like, well, we have to make tough decisions. So they're not even going to do that. I think on optics, right? Again, he's not the worst in Ukraine. I disagree with him on Ukraine, the fact that he wants to sign us up for a 100-year deal, and he basically said it's going to be unlimited money, £3 billion a year. I think is absurd. I mean, if you're going to basically means test disability benefits, but not Ukraine, I don't particularly like that, and I think that's what people say on the ground. So I do think his praise comes from more of the media, because he wants to be, right. He doesn't care about domestic policy. He wants to be a statesman on the national stage. But at this moment in time, our country is crumbling. Our infrastructure is fucked. The domestic things, like the bread and butter stuff, isn't working for the majority of people, and they feel it. I mean, you look at, even in big cities, right? You go to just side roads, and you can see how left behind it all is. And then imagine Runcorn, a place that is completely left behind, and they're seeing the Prime Minister do a speech from Ukraine, or talking about Ukraine. About Ukraine. I don't think that lands.
But there's been so many missed opportunities, right, where they could have had literally what would be even cost-free or even cost-saving populist ideas, right? The MP's pay rise, right? They push this off as like, oh, it's an independent body, we don't make the decision, but you do have the power to say no to it. So just imagine the day Keir Starmer comes out on a lectern, right, and he's saying, am I going to accept a pay rise for MPs right now while this country is a mess, while we're refusing to give pay rises to other people? Do you think I'm going to put more money in the pockets of MPs when everybody else is struggling? Absolutely not. Can you imagine how well that would go down? How amazing it would be? That would be on the headlines. Everybody would be talking about that. It's like such easy wins like that they just miss out on. That just makes them such poor communicators, such poor planners. And it's so frustrating, because what they're competing with is a media ecosystem, whether it's it's the right wing of the mainstream or the online alt, where they're constantly viewing topics every morning. People wake up on their phones, the reform supporters, and they'll scroll on X, scroll on TikTok, and see right wing stuff. They'll travel to work, watch social media. They'll go on their lunch break, watch social media, and they're constantly consuming this stuff. And Keir Starmer's turning around and going, "Oh, I don't want to intrude in people's lives too much." It's like, well, you have to. This is what you're competing with.
Cog, you were the one that brought the Greens, to be fair. So we'll probably talk about the smaller parties for a bit, the Greens and Lib Dems specifically. I agree with your analysis that I do think that, look, let's establish the facts. It is true that the Green Party have increased their councillors every single year. No other party's done that. Fantastic, right?
For 8 years in a row.
For 8 years in a row. I do agree, though, Cog, that the moment right now, it's a big challenge, but it needs to be met. I don't think even the Lib Dems, they did pretty well, but again, not groundbreaking. The Greens did okay, but I don't. Their results doesn't give me confidence that they can rise to the current crises and the challenge of reform. So, what do you make of their election results, specifically as well, west of England, right? The Greens, and it's not the fact that they didn't win. The big problem is that they lost in terms of vote share. Now, if we're going to be going forward and the Greens are making gains, especially the west of England, like that's, if you want to think of a green heartland, it's there, right? I mean, obviously they've got Carla Denyer and Bristol, my hometown, extremely progressive. They lost their vote share in west of England mayoral race. They came third. Aaron Banks came second. That, I'm worried. What's your thought?
I think a lot of the things that are wrong with the Greens can be fixed through looking at their rhetoric and how they speak when they are on camera. It was suggested the other day that Adrian Ramsey should debate Nigel Farage. I think that's a bad idea. I think the Greens still have quite a bit to learn about rhetoric. Now, I'm not the best at rhetoric, but I can see the difference between somebody like Garage Economics talking, Gary Stevenson talking, and when, even though I think she's a good speaker, Carla Denyer speaks, the raw passion comes across when Gary speaks. I feel like he believes what he is saying and he is speaking directly to me. Whereas Carla, I feel like she has planned out what she's going to say and she is saying it. I think she believes those words, but they are words on a screen and that is how they're getting read out. The same goes for Adrian. I think Zach is Zach is currently deputy leader and he's got a little bit of a stronger presence personally, in terms of his ability to be able to speak from the heart. But I think all of the major leadership need to work with coaches to try and get their speaking styles up to par, because it's not how it's supposed to be, but it is true that elections are won and lost on rhetoric and personality. Rhetoric is a big part of this. I did just want to touch on as well, when we're talking about the why Labour might have walked away with this impression that swinging right is the way to go. I think some of that is down to the fact that the Conservative Party lost so badly that when I was doing my notes for this, I put Kemi Badenoch. Like I wrote Kemi Badenoch down, and the first thing I've written underneath is still exists, right? I had to remind myself that she is still there, because they're still losing that badly. She said she's working to renew the party, and Nigel Farage kind of acknowledged how difficult her position was, but said he wanted her to stay in power because it's good for him, good for...
Yeah, and I saw that. I was like, there's only reason why he wants her to stay, because she's ineffective.
But like the point is that I was kind of getting to is that I think a lot of the people at the top of the Labour Party still think they're living in the late 1990s and early 2000s. I think they still think that their primary opposition going forward is going to be the Conservatives. So when they see the Conservatives being defeated, they're like, oh, well, we can outflank reform. That's kind of not a problem. And I think they are underestimating Nigel Farage and the potential for Nigel Farage to become a large figure.
You say that Labour think they're stuck in the 1990s. wholeheartedly agree, by the way. They think that they can just revive Blair and everyone will be happy with that. Do you think the Greens are stuck in 2010 then? Because they are, I mean, some of the message is pretty good.
I think you're being unfair.
Well, I mean, I will ask you about that as well, because I think you obviously have a slightly different view. But do you think they are stuck in the 2010s of the, all we need to do is robustly debate and, and be polite. Whereas you've got Reform literally happy to batter you, essentially.
I don't think that's necessarily true. I think the Greens have been great on their conviction. They've been great at moving with the times. Certainly, like their position on things like trans rights has moved along with the times.
I mean, I don't mean in policy though. I mean
in policy.
More
you mean in rhetoric?
Yeah.
In rhetoric, they still do have a lot to work on. But honestly, that is it's strategy that needs redressing. But it will be easier to turn the Greens into a party that the left can unite under than it will be trying to get the Labour Party there. But I imagine Callum might have a different take, so
I want to hear.
Well, I do, and actually, I just want to, if I may, just quickly. I want to bring up a comment from Vicky Clee, but before I do that, can I just say that I spotted this earlier? I don't know if we were coming to it, but where is it? Zeke the Beast. $50 donation there.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Some support for all. Thank you.
A hell of a lot of money.
We do really appreciate it.
That means the world. Thank you so much.
And while we're at it, Border Prince has gifted 10 memberships as well.
If anybody matches that, Curtis said behind the scenes he will take up his top. So,
what we're going to do when we triple that, Lewis? Be my guest. Should we? I mean, do we do a quick plug? Look, I mean, I can't actually. By the way, we've got some really good viewers tonight because it's based on the election. And we didn't have a specific story in the title. I thought, I don't know if people are going to watch. We've actually got 161 people watching concurrently, 47 people on Twitter, 108 on YouTube. So I just want to say, everyone who's watching, thank you so much. Our typical guests, thank you again. Guests, audience, we love you. Thank you for all of your super chats and your memberships. This is all voluntary. We're doing this outside of our paid jobs. We want this to be our full time. This is an independent media platform, right? We don't get any money from the big guys. If we got money from the big guys, we'd already be in the media and be famous. But that's playing politics on easy mode, and you can only do that for your right wing, right? I was saying to my partner actually, I said if I start a YouTube channel, right, and I was right wing, I get 100k subs in a year, right? Because politics and easy mode for the right. You can't do that on the left. But we rely on your support. So I want to thank everyone who's done that. If you did want to support us, you can go to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There you can support us through Patreon, which is a monthly subscription, as little as £3 per month. Or there's another link that can give you a direction to a one-off donation as well. If you just want to give us a one-off donation, that's fine. Or alternatively, you can become a YouTube member for 99p. Thank you so much to those who've already donated. Sorry to cut you off. I just want to do a quick plug.
No, it's good.
Carry on.
It's good. And we couldn't do it without the support that we get, so it's fair enough. No, Vicky said, can I just interject here? There was only one authority that had other elections. All other areas in the mayoral one just had the West England combined authority election. And I think it's worth noting that because when you've got other local elections taking place, you're going to get more people turning out. People are more likely to vote for the smaller parties as well. But also, I mean, if we look at the vote share, and I'll get onto the wider thing about the Greens in a moment, but if we just look at that West of England mayor vote, 20% for the Greens, which is down from previous, 22.1% for Reform, 25% for Labour. A lot of the polls that were coming out, there was about 3 or 4 different polls over the space of about 3 days that had it, really tight between Labour and Reform, really tight between Labour and the Greens, really tight between Reform and the Greens. And I think it's possible that some people that maybe they might not necessarily be, regular Green voters, but they might have voted for Green in the past, who maybe saw some of that and thought, we really want to keep Reform out, we're going to vote Labour, because they'd seen a poll that suggested that Labour were the most likely to beat them. Now, I know that you could pick that apart because just as quickly as that poll came out, there was another poll that said that the Greens were set to win it. So, but I do think that probably played a part. But also, I know it's like it's a bit of a running joke almost today of all the Green MPs and all the Green councillors and representatives talking about the fact that Greens have made gains for the 8th year running, but they have the Greens electoral strategy. Given they have barely any media presence, although that has improved recently and is slowly getting better, although it's still a long way to go, and they don't have the backing of multimillionaires, their election strategies work. The strategy that they use to win their target seats is a proven record, and not only do they win seats, but they then get re-elected and win more seats, because when they're elected, and I'm doing the party line here, but when they're elected, they're proving to people that when you elect Greens, you get hard-working councillors who actually care about the community, do the work, and then they get re-elected as a result, and then other people locally go on to elect them. And I think the Lib Dems are exactly the same. The Lib Dems also have a really good sort of ethic around them of community champions and people that genuinely care about the community. And that's why we've seen gains from the Lib Dems too. I agree that it would have been amazing to see the Greens do better. Of course we wanted to. I fought my arse off helping a really good friend of mine who was standing in a target seat in Chorley South to win. And we should have walked it. It shouldn't have been an issue. It should have been between us and Labour. All the data showed it was between us and Labour. Labour were going to go, and the Greens, we should have walked it. Reform almost appeared out of nowhere. Bam, 400 votes more than what the Greens got. It was the best result for the Greens in that area. But Reform came in and just took us by surprise. And I think that what's happened is, like I said earlier on, Reform have surprised even themselves. And I agree it would have been nice to see the Greens and even the Liberal Democrats perhaps do better. But I do think that I don't think it's necessarily an issue with those parties and the way that they've conducted their campaigns as much as it is Reform really surprising people and just doing exceptionally well. And I think that's I think it says,
well, Callum.
I think it says more about Reform than it does about the other parties, though.
While you're talking about ground game, it's important to note that Reform still don't have a fully established ground game. They've obviously focused in certain areas, but they've managed to do as well as they have without an established system, right?
Well,
like, can we imagine what they're going to be like in 4 years when they
but
have?
it's gonna, but sorry to interrupt you, Curtis, but that's going to bite them on the arse, right? I know for a fact that where I am in Lancashire County Council is now one of the many that are now going to be run by Reform. I know for a fact that one of the people who was elected onto that council was asked to stand 6 weeks ago. They've got no experience in any of this. They've got no care about the community at all. And their view to it is, if we get elected, it'll be a bit of a laugh. They haven't got a clue what they're doing. And I think what we're going to see in probably after the summer, I think we're going to see a huge number up and down the country of by-elections because of Reform councillors who are either quitting because they realise that they just cannot handle it because they don't have a clue what they get themselves into, or also likely because a number of them are forced to resign because they get caught up in all sorts of scandals because they don't have a clue what they're doing, and they end
I just don't think it'll make news though, Callum.
It won't make news, absolutely.
But like, if they can take the win of the numbers from this, like if over the next 3 years half of these councillors quit, it wouldn't really affect like their appearance to the rest of the country, right? It never does. The only story recently with any councils that have affected anybody is Birmingham, right? And that's obviously at like the worst end of the scale.
No, but I'll tell you who it does affect though, Lewis. It affects local communities and the people that are affected by those councils. And actually, something that has been clear and is always the case on the doorstep, even though people often don't realise that what they're voting for, they notice when those councillors aren't doing the work they're supposed to be doing. They notice when the potholes aren't getting filled, when the bins aren't getting emptied, when the grit bins aren't full. They notice these issues when they're not getting dealt with properly.
I do think there's one problem here, or maybe one gap here that you might not necessarily be wrong, but maybe something to think about, which is that, let's be honest, a lot of core support for Reform is very national. I mean, when we do Vox Pops, right? I mean, Lewis, you can attest to this. When you watch Navarra's coverage of Runcorn and they do Vox Pops and you speak to these people, they're from Kent, they're from London, and they say, stop the boats, right? That is not a local issue. I mean, stopping the boats has nothing to do with the fact that you live in the middle of London. Why are you saying that?
No,
it's because it's a very national thing.
Oh, of course.
Therefore, what I mean by that is maybe people aren't going to respond to these local issues because they're tied to the idea that I like reform because they know what a woman is. They can bring down immigration and stop the boats.
But
And
what
then when there's any issues of the local community, they can say, oh, it's Labour's fault. I mean, how many times do people, have a Conservative MP is their local MP, but the national government is blamed for it? I know they set the budgets, but obviously sometimes if you have a Labour government and a Conservative MP, or vice versa, actually, you'll know when the Conservatives were in power, they specifically gave less funding to Labour areas because they knew it wasn't good for their votes. And people just think they blame the national government. And the media doesn't pick up these local issues. I can see that people are going to still think, my life's shit, the bins aren't being collected, that's Labour's fault, I'm still going to vote reform because stop the boats. And they almost ignore the local stuff because when it comes to the Greens, for example, they're very hyper-local. And people actually respond to that. In fact, actually, they respond so much, which, I mean, Bristol Green Council, I'm not going to lie, they've stuffed that up a little bit, especially, I know it didn't go through, but the proposal that they were going to cut bin collections, just the idea that they were going to
probably
do that,
affected the mayor election as well.
I think it did. And that got into the media. But because the Greens are held to a very high standard locally, because that's their sort of modus operandi at the moment, it's very different for reform.
It's different for reform. It's different for reform now, but in 2 or 3 years' time, when all these local areas are falling apart because they've had councils that have been run by incompetent idiots that don't have a clue what they're doing, I am optimistic that at least enough people to get the bastards out will realise that actually reform aren't helping. And like you said, the Greens do focus hyper local. The Lib Dems also focus hyper local, and that is why we have seen those two parties make gains in these elections. I think because when they go out and they do the work in the local area, that's appreciated and people re-elect them. And I'm hopeful that I mean, don't get me wrong, some of these reform councillors might turn out to be wonderful for the local area. I highly doubt it, but you never know. And if they are, then great. They might get re-elected. But I think what we're going to see is a lot of areas, bearing in mind a lot of these people that have been elected, like I say, have just been asked to do it last minute. They're doing it for a laugh. They don't have a clue how to run an authority. And because they've gained these councils and are controlling these councils, they've not got anyone to show them how to do it either. Farage has been out today to put in, was it Durham Council? He was putting on notice saying that if you work in DEI or if you work on climate change within the council, then you need to find another job. Or if you work from home, you need to find another job. We're going to see redundancies in a lot of these councils because they're just going to get rid of staff. They're going to say, well, we don't need you anymore. And they're going to go all Doge on them. And that's going to have a negative impact on local communities when the services that they need aren't getting dealt with. And I think people will see that.
The Runcorn by-election, that was Labour's 16th safest seat, right? I kind of take issue that it's being framed like that because, this is my opinion, I welcome for you to agree or disagree, there are no safe seats anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a fair analysis. I think I've just been thinking about why I think that Reform have done so well, and the Greens and Lib Dems have done comparatively badly. I think part of it is the split effect, like liberal, more left wing voters, people who would otherwise kind of unite around Labour, 10 years ago or so. Are now split between lots of different parties. It's the classic problem with the left is we fracture into lots of different parties. Like some people will go to the Lib Dems. I don't really think that they're a left party, but that aside, other people go to the Greens. There's lots of independents, and the independents tend to be left-wing independents, not right-wing independents. It doesn't tend to work out as right-wing independents. And then you go to the right, and it's basically just Reform. Like that is basically the default. I don't like the main party, so I'm going to vote Reform. I think another problem is in terms of strategy. I understand what you're saying, Callum, about the Greens having ground game. I think having ground game is good, but I do also think that Greens organised is underplayed. If you look at the success of Reform, a big part of the success of Reform in the last general election, where they got a lot of their sort of like, they're a serious party now, came from them getting young men out and voting for them. and that came through social media engagement. There is an absolute wealth of left-wing social media engaged people that you could be getting out door knocking in the way that the Corbyn campaign did in 2019 and 2017, more importantly, that the Greens need to be sort of exploiting and using. I think Greens Organise is a good start. If you're not aware of Greens Organise, it's basically like a group of creators that campaign for the Greens and on issues to do with the Greens. And I think they need more of that. They need to throw some support towards that, throw some funding towards that, and realize that you haven't got the strength of being in the mainstream media. And Reform have answered this with things like GB News. They've answered it with like, okay, well, the mainstream media don't like us. We'll create our own media. I think the Greens are going to have to do something similar on the left. It doesn't have to be with Turn Left, by the way. That's not what I'm suggesting, although it's lovely if they do want us to get involved. But just engaging with lots of small left-wing media organizations to raise their profile and get people campaigning for them online as well, because I think that's the future of alternative guerrilla parties that operate outside of the two-party binary.
So, Cog, how would you balance the? Because there's a I don't want to call it a problem because it's not a problem as such, but there is. Excuse me, there's very much a divide in the Green Party, and it's almost a 50-50 split.
Yeah.
You've got all the sort of slightly older, more middle class, your almost sort of like your Green Tory types who founded the party, have been around for a long time, understand the internal workings of the party inside out and upside down. And then you've got the other 50%, which are largely younger members, many people like myself that, joined Labour under Jeremy Corbyn and have found a new home in the Greens. Much more left-wing and socialist. And I want to be clear, I don't believe the Green Party is a socialist party. They offer some socialist policies, but the
Labour Party wasn't a socialist party.
Well,
I don't think that's a problem. I think it's about getting some good redistributive policies. And
we've got there's a big 50-50 split almost, and I mean we see it on policies like the HS2 vote, for example, which was almost split right down the middle, and it was very much the younger, newer, the type of people that will be involved with Greens Organised, for example, that were very much we need to get behind and support HS2. And then the older, more sort of small c conservative, Green Party members that have been there a while who were like, no, we're very much anti-HS2 and that must remain our policy. How would you sort of solve that? Because a lot of, and I fully support Greens Organised and I think what they do is amazing. But how do we balance that within the party? Because there's many within the party that look at that and think, whoa, no, you're taking us in a direction that this party is not about.
I think one of the things you could model it after, and people who've been watching for a while will know I'm a big fan of this. You could model it after Joe Biden's unity task forces. Now, obviously, Joe Biden's got a bad reputation because of what has just happened in the 2024 US elections. But in 2020, they were actually, the people surrounding Biden were very successful at bringing the right and the left of the party together. People like AOC on the left and people like John Kerry on the right were coming together, and they were getting the big figures of both of those sort of sides of the party together.
Bernie Sanders was very much involved in the campaign, wasn't he?
Saying to them, but it wasn't just Bernie Sanders. You see what I mean? It was bringing together the right and the left of the party, and
the Labour have purged those people.
If you want to, exactly. Labour have, the Greens haven't, which is
let's unite with the left. Wait, there's none left.
Yeah, there's none left. There's a 50-50 split. In the Greens, as Cal said. So if you want to get the older Greens talking to the older sort of established Greens talking to the the younger groups, and you want to have them agree things amongst themselves, and then come forward to the leadership of the party. Carla Denyer and Adrian Ramsey, and say, here is what we would propose. Try and run with this, and try and match it up as best as they can with what was voted for in the what's it called? My mind's gone blank.
What voted for? What, in conference? You mean?
Conference? Yeah. So
well, there's two. Just on that, because there's two really good points as well that which I mean. I can't really speak for any other party. I know that Labour claim they do this, but they really don't. But one thing that the Greens do have, where this will help, is it's the one member, one vote when it comes to deciding policy. And unlike in parties like the Labour Party, where the membership and the unions can vote to support proportional representation, and then Keir Starmer goes, "Now fuck that." When something is passed through as policy in the Green Party, it becomes party policy. Although MPs and councillors aren't whips like they are in others, so I suppose they can still represent people in their own way. But it becomes policy, and it is the policy of the party. So if some people in the party don't like that, then they can vote against it. But if it's voted for a majority, then it's policy, right?
That was the point I was actually going to make. I don't think it's as big of an issue because they actually have a democratic party. So if there's big ideological differences, HS2 for example, it just gets voted on. I mean, I think the splits and factions are really, really bad when you have a very, very undemocratic system like the Labour Party. I mean, the Labour Party's entire history, its most famous sort of stories about the party, when you read up on the history of it, is about the splits, about the factions, about the infighting. I mean, Labour's so well known for it because they're so anti-democratic. So I actually think it's not too much of a big deal for the Greens. Of course, the slight issue is what Callum said about there's no whipping issue. There's no sort of accountability for MPs. I'm sure that might change. There's only 4 of them at the moment.
I don't think it needs to. I think it's a good sell on the doorstep because what it means is that if you're in one area and you've got a very particular demographic of people in your area and they want X, Y, and Z, that might be very different to what somebody in another area wants and needs. And you can actually vote for the people that elected you to represent them, rather than being told you have to vote the way that. For example, I mean, take the HS2 thing. If you're a councillor and you represent someone in a community that's where they've had their homes taken off them because of HS2, and these people are really against it, then you can campaign, even though it's party policy is now to support it. You're still free to campaign against it from within the party to represent those people, and I think it allows you to better represent. Then kind of makes you ask, well, what's the point of having the party policy, I suppose. But it gives you more freedom to represent the actual needs and wants of the people that elected you, rather than what often happens. Which is, like in West Cumbria, where I grew up, for example, where they just had the whole thing about the coal mine that then didn't happen. There was literally elected councillors who were campaigning for a mine that they knew they were never going to get because the people in Cumbria wanted it, rather than being honest and saying to them, look, it's not doable. But it was also the policy of the party at the time that they were supporting it. And then they changed that. And then obviously, they didn't. But yeah, I think it comes with pros and cons.
Okay, so these are actually the latest results we have so far. It's 22 out of 23 councils. So this is the BBC feed. A lot of people get on a different feed. When you go to like Sky or Channel 4, they're actually smaller, but this is the latest. Right, this is the turn left technology we're using here. I think we should probably go to your comments though, because we've been talking for about over an hour. So I think
I wanted to bring up one more little topic, if I could, very quickly.
Absolutely, go for it. Yeah.
Is this the end of the Tories?
Probably, yeah, I think so.
If you actually look at the list of councils, if you look at it from a council perspective, what I've noticed is that you've got areas which are traditionally more conservative, but they're not like crazily right wing, right? They're not the type of conservatives who necessarily demonize the Muslims or get caught up in the culture wars and stuff like that. They're just more traditional conservatives. Places like you've got Cambridgeshire, Oxfordshire, these types of places, right? If you actually just go on like the BBC map and see the breakdown of some of the councils that have been won on taken away from conservatives, these types of councils have been absolutely eaten up by the Liberal Democrats, and usually Reform have come in second. So they've eaten away, and then you've got the more kind of like rural but city adjacent kind of places, so like places like Staffordshire and lots of the areas in and around Birmingham, but like the rural parts of Birmingham, these are the ones that have been eaten up by Reform away from the Conservatives. And you've got places like Cornwall, which is kind of like half split between the Lib Dems taking most of the seats and the Reform taking most of the seats. Like, where does this actually leave the Conservatives? Because they have been just utterly and completely eaten up. Like, yeah, maybe they could make a comeback, but if you've got the quote unquote sensible conservatives, if that's a thing, going to Liberal Democrats, and you've got the more harder, more perhaps like Thatcherite, way more right wing and radical people going towards reform, where does this leave the Tory party?
I think we're going to
Kemi's not
see.
going to last 6 more months.
I think we're going to see a shift. I think what's going to happen is that Reform UK will essentially replace the Conservatives.
Yeah.
And actually, I think what needs to happen if Labour don't get the shit together is I feel like the Greens need to try and replace Labour. I can genuinely envisage a scenario at the next general election where one of the smaller, less common parties is either running the country or at the very least in opposition. By the way, just quickly, I'll come back to that just quickly. I just want to point out though, we're saying about the Greens not doing particularly well. They've more than doubled the number of councillors that they've got. That's better. That's better percentage-wise than any other party apart from Reform. So let's not be too harsh on them.
It's particularly how well they've done compared to Reform. And I do have to say Reform have done
But
exceptionally well.
if you look, right, Reform are on 662 and the Conservatives are down 662.
The
So
Conservatives,
which comes back to what Lewis was saying, because I think what's happened is I think a lot of and I know some of the swing has been from Labour as well, but I think what's happened is essentially Reform are replacing the Conservatives, and I think we'll continue to see more of that. Bearing in mind, the leader of Lancashire County Council going forward, who is Reform, 6 weeks ago was the Conservative leader on South Ribble Council down the road. But he resigned as the Conservative, stood for Reform, and he's now going to be leading the council as Reform. And apparently, there's supposed to be a different party. Like they're the same people.
So maybe the three biggest names, Reform names to come out of this would be. Did I see Darren Grimes was?
Yes,
Darren Grimes. Yeah.
I think that can only be bad for them because Darren Grimes is pathetic. But Darren Grimes, you've got Andrea Jenkins. And Sarah Pochin, I think, are probably the three big Reform figures to come out of this, right? Mm-hmm. You've got Darren Grimes, former Conservative Party campaigner.
Former Lib Dem supporter, former Remainer.
But importantly, most recently, former Conservative Party. Andrea Jenkins, former Conservative Party, round with Boris Johnson. Sarah Pochin,
middle finger up at people outside Downing Street.
Sarah Pochin, who is a former Conservative councillor and campaigned alongside Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, and Theresa May. Right? They're not the Conservatives. They are the Conservatives. Yes. They've changed their branding. That is one of the things to highlight, I think, is that they've changed their branding. So while I agree, Lewis, that the Conservative Party might be done, certainly as an ideology, they've just changed clothes. They've come out with a change of costume, a moustache and a false moustache. That just
shows how good the Conservatives are at being a chameleon, because that'll be the second time they've done it. They've done it to the Labour Party, and now they're going to do it to Reform. So the Conservative Party has not died. The Conservative Party is the strongest political wing in Britain, isn't it? It's infected every single political party.
But it will be interesting to see what happens if, Kemi is absolutely going to get ousted. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Obviously, it'll be interesting to see where she goes now, because she knows she's only got a few months left on the clock. She can't be ousted until a year after she was elected. If Robert Jenrick becomes the leader, where he's at right now, I think he's squarely in line with Nigel Farage. Like, they have the same ideology, they have the same rhetoric. So he's obviously going to go more right wing to that, because that's the only way to compete with Reform. And that's going to be interesting, because it has been, it needs to be said, Nigel Farage is no longer the most right-wing mainstream politician, right? You've obviously got everyone from like Rupert Lowe. I would say other people in his party are actually much more right-wing than him. And there are some Tories who edge towards being way more right-wing than Nigel Farage, which is weird. There are people who are more right-wing than Nigel Farage in mainstream politics. And Robert Jenrick will absolutely take us there. He will. But how will he make himself look different? Speculating until he becomes leader.
But talking about Kemi, I've got two questions for you then. So the first question is, well, given the massive defeat from the Conservatives, you could argue that it's a leftover from last time. But what are we saying? They're down 662 seats. Should Kemi Badenoch be resigning? But also to flip that back to Labour, like I said earlier on, when Labour didn't even do half as badly as what they've done today. Back in 2021, Keir Starmer allegedly was genuinely considering resigning. So does Starmer need to go? Or if not Starmer, who within the Labour Party needs to take the rap for this? Because they cannot claim, I know they say it's only been 9 months, but how they cannot go from having a brilliant, wonderful, huge majority on the lowest vote share in history at the last general election to performing this badly 9 months in and losing a by-election in a seat that had a 15,000 majority only 9 months ago and not have somebody take the rap for it. So who needs to resign from the Tories for their performance and who should be going from Labour?
No one's going to go from Labour. They're just going to keep telling themselves the story of like, we knew this was coming. We knew this was coming. We've had to make hard decisions. I don't think
really doesn't matter
anytime soon.
It honestly really doesn't matter. The Labour Party has changed forever. If Keir Starmer goes, who have you got waiting? David Lammy, Wes Streeting, Rachel Reeves. It doesn't matter. Morgan McSweeney isn't going anywhere. But even if he does, it doesn't. The party's been hollowed out. Okay, the party needs to die. In fact, actually, we probably can't get change in this country if the Labour Party exists. To sort of allude to what Callum was saying, there's going to be no replacement of the Labour Party for a long, long time. There is going to be a replacement of the Conservatives. That's reform. And this also sort of alludes to what Cog was saying at the beginning of the show, which is that, and this happens all of the time, the right coalesces around one force, the left doesn't coalesce around the other. So we're going to have a big sort of, real big constituency, reform. They're going to be, I think they're going to win the next election. I think it's plausible they could get a majority. And then you're going to have, obviously, the other side of Parliament holding them to account in a sort of rainbow coalition, which is going to be Labour, the Greens, SNP, the Lib Dems. You're not going to get the Greens or the Lib Dems overtake Labour just yet. But, you know, just imagine, though, just in sort of the early 20th century when there was that seismic shift when the Liberals were overtaken by the Labour Party and then the Liberals became the Lib Dems in the 80s with the SDP. It would be quite funny if, like, 100 years later, the exact sort of U-turn happened, that the Liberals come back and take Labour. I don't think that's going to happen. I think actually, probably, might need to be a new left-wing party that can take it. Right now, I'm not calling for that because I think under first past the post, the Greens are the most viable party. But who knows in 5-10 years' time? Look, reform has been backed by GB News and a lot of the mainstream media. Sure, but you got to remember, 2 years ago they were polling at 3%. Now they're looking at majoritarian territory.
Here's a question for you, Curtis. Given reforms, and Nigel Farage is actually years of calling for proportional representation. If they do win the next general election, do you think they'll change the voting system?
No, they won't.
No, not if they get in power. Because it's like the free speech thing. They only believe in free speech until they get the authority to control what free speech is, and then they're like,
because they'd never actually have a majority under proportional representation.
It's been decades since any party's got over 50% of the vote share.
I don't think PR is going to happen.
The SNP did it,
you know,
in Scotland.
I think
in Scotland's very different. That's on a nationalistic issue, but in the UK, there's too many parties. It's just never going to happen.
I think
why
PR's going
to come in at 30, 35%, or even nearer to 40, and be like, we're going to change the voting system and make it harder for us to get into power next time. The only way that they could pull it off. This is the only way that they could do it. They could come into power, and then they could say, well, there's going to be a review. But because we're changing the entire system, the review is going to take a while. And they wouldn't do it in their first parliament, because why would you?
Absolutely not. Right, we've got to move on because it is 9:15. So we're going to go to your comments. Let's have a look. I think it'd be really interesting to see what people have said. I hope you guys have also been tracking the comments. I've done a little bit, but I can't say I've done all of them.
Tiny bit.
Okay, this is a good one. Katie Marshall. Lovely turn left comrades on our screens. Is this going to be a nail or a coffin nail for Starmer? Now in the coffin for Starmer's leader PM. We kind of alluded to that. Is Keir Starmer going to fight the next general election?
Oh, absolutely not. I think it's going to be Wes Streeting.
I think he'll still be fighting it because I think if it's not him, it'll be somebody very like him. It could, in fairness, be Wes Streeting.
There were some suggestions.
But I think it's to do with how the party's been restructured, because the democracy's been sucked out of the party. Sorry, Callum.
And I was going to say there was some suggestion today that there was rumours, smatterings that Ed Miliband could end up taking his place.
That's not going to
Won't
happen.
happen. Will not
That is
happen.
not going to happen.
I'd never say never nowadays. In
He is
politics.
technically the most popular MP in Labour, though.
He's the most popular MP within the membership, of course. But obviously, the membership are way to the left. They're not. The membership aren't left wing, but they're way to the left of the Labour Party because, anyone is. But of course, if Ed Miliband became leader, they would never win an election. Like, why would you do that? But I think that Keir Starmer could
Just don't give him a
potentially.
sandwich.
I think that Keir Starmer could step down before the election. I think he's going to serve his full term. But
He'll be ousted by McSweeney.
That's the thing, though. I don't know, because for me, I don't think they really care about. They care more about their side winning inside the Labour Party than they do about winning the country. I mean, you can see it now. They're saying we're not going to change strategy, despite the fact that all the signs are telling them change strategy. So I'm not so sure. But it doesn't matter anyway, because, as I said, Starmer goes. Who's going to replace Keir Starmer? It's going to be these guys who, by the way, are just going to listen to Morgan McSweeney. Or if Morgan McSweeney isn't there, if he goes, the void is going to be filled by a man in a suit, a yes man who listens to the donors. There was, when Jeremy Corbyn ran for Labour leadership, there was excitement because there was a change in direction, and that happened because the leader had the control to do it. Even the 2020 election, there was a lot of speculation. A lot of us stupidly thought that maybe a left-wing candidate's going to win because the membership was solidly behind the left. It wasn't quite the case, was it? But now, there's no point even having leadership elections because they're not really elections. There's going to be no change in policy or ideology. I just say it again, I think the party needs to just die, crash and burn.
Don't disagree.
Sorry, I was just checking the results for the West Northamptonshire Council. It's the last one to be called.
Just there's been a lot of people asking about Sarah. She couldn't make it tonight, unfortunately, but she sends her love to everyone.
We McSweeney'd her.
We did.
What? She's leader of the Labour Party.
We didn't deliberately leave her out.
She's an anti-Semite.
Well, it was actually going to be the three of us, wasn't it? And then Sarah, I think, and then Callum came aboard, so there's four of us, and Sarah's like, I want to join, and then she couldn't make it. But I was like, to be honest, like, 5 would have been, well, we like this big on the screen.
If I would have had like a better colour, we're kind of giving Power Rangers right now. I don't know.
Oh, we are. We've got
purple.
I've noticed I'm
Talk
matching
with
the
the
background
red.
a little bit.
Power Rangers.
Of course, Callum's in the green.
Is that the Power Rangers thing? I don't even know.
I think so.
It's turn left
from
Power
the
Rangers.
90s. Yes.
No, it's a Roman salute, Lewis. That's what it is.
Roman salute. It's a Roman
Sorry,
Rangers.
Elon.
It's okay, guys. We have some diversity here. I'm gay.
Oh,
Thank
so
you.
just some. The Tories have now lost control of all 18 councils they were defending as Reform UK takes West Northamptonshire in the final result.
There we go.
Yep.
So that's 10. That's 10 councils, I think, now that Reform UK
It might have
have full control over.
the time for this might have passed, but I do want to emphasise that Labour are not contending with reform. Most Tory voters are going to reform, most ex-Tory voters. Labour are not even contending with the Greens and the Lib Dems as a whole. They are contending with the didn't show up because so many of their voters have just become disillusioned
Yes,
with
true.
electoral politics. And who can blame voters for being
True.
disillusioned with electoral politics right now when you've got 3 different shades of Conservative Party staring at you down the barrel of the fucking camera every time you turn on the news? It's silly. Neil Lawson, who works for the campaign group
isn't it?
Compass,
Yeah.
said, I thought it was an interesting quote, Labour need to understand that if people want reforms policies, then they will vote for reform. What should terrify Labour strategists in Runcorn is that the Green vote went up, even though Green voters knew this might let reform in, right? In other words, it's a direct rejection of the
Yeah.
new Labour strategy, which is fear of the right wing will keep them voting for us. And
I don't buy that.
there's a big change now.
I do buy that, and I think, and the reason why I buy that is because once upon a time, I think there were people who much prefer the Greens, prefer the Lib Dems, would lend the Labour Party their vote through fear of the Tories getting in, whether it's a local or general election. The reason why I buy that now is because those who are voting Green look at the Labour Party, think there is literally no difference. I'm not going to vote for a party that cuts disability benefits, that cuts winter fuel payments, and I'm not going to vote for a party that is literally complicit in a genocide. I think there comes a point when the Labour Party has stepped over a line and they've gone way past that line where people are saying, I'm going to vote with my conscience, I'm not voting tactically. For me, right, I will never vote Labour ever again. Even if Clive Lewis becomes the leader of the party, it won't happen. The reason why I won't do it is because I've done that before. I've gone down that road. I bought into the Labour Party to Jeremy Corbyn, right? I'm not doing that again. But also, even for a strategy, even in thinking in terms of strategy, right? You can't trust the Labour Party. I want them held to account from their left. So I'm thinking, even if the Labour Party pivots to the centre left, I'm still going to vote most likely Green because I want there to be more Green MPs and less Labour MPs. And then Labour are going to be like, right, we're going to need to try and go back to the left because we're going to keep losing votes to them. It's not just about voting left to try and shift the Labour Party left. It's also about keeping them left if that were to happen. So for me, I wouldn't vote Labour ever again. And I can believe those people who would say, I'll vote Green even if Reform could win it.
But the idea as well that people will band together to, keep the far right out like they have in certain European countries, like people working together in Germany to keep the AfD out. You've got obviously what happened in France, right? You had an actual genuine coalition of people trying to keep Marine Le Pen's, I can't remember the name of the party, out of power. And they worked really hard together on that. The difference is that we know that Nigel Farage and the Reform Party are far right, but they don't appear it to a lot of casual voters in any way because Nigel Farage has moderated himself and occasionally he does throw things out there which are more extreme when he'll talk about Muslims. But in France, they've, the non-far right have banned the burqa. In Germany, the AfD were talking about literally re-immigration. Our far right don't do that. They're more sensible and more moderated in certain way, even though that we know that they love to do these things. So I don't buy that people would band together because I don't think that the Reform Party are seen by the casual person as far right, even though we know
they're not.
They are.
No.
We know who they are, but a lot of people just don't. And
people laugh at that idea. They laugh at the idea. They don't think the far right can exist in Britain, and they laugh at that. I'm conscious that we've sort of gone away from the comments a little bit, so maybe we should go back to them. But responds to Horshite, which is a brilliant name. So once again, the English had a simple choice, Tory or Green, and they want Tory again because they wanted to protest against the incumbent Tories in power, make it make sense. I mean, it makes sense to me when you break it down, though. I mean, obviously, I think people are angry at the political establishment. Reform are not anti-establishment. They pitch themselves that way. Of course, they're not anti-establishment, right? And, of course, we just kicked out the Conservatives TM. There's no point calling them the Conservatives when they're all Conservative. So the Conservatives TM, the Conservative Party, they're not going to go back to them, are they? So, but again, I agree. They're all shades of Conservative parties. Michael Anson, the amount of Reform voters who thought it was a general election is wild. I don't know who's been telling you that.
I've met a few of these people.
You did? It's very funny. Sati.
Well, no, actually,
Satyasa.
just on that, can I just say the number of Reform candidates who thought this was a general election is wild as well. That some of the promises, honestly, that some of these local candidates were making,
Yeah.
they're gonna lower taxes, they're gonna stop boats in a county that's the other side of the
Mind
country.
you, the Labour Party do that as well. They're so out of touch. The Labour Party campaign on national issues, and it's like it's not a national vote. Sati Asa? Fucking hell. Sorry. Yeah, but they do want far right stuff. If they didn't, they wouldn't vote for it. We need to understand that most people, most of the time, are far right through vibes and bias and bigotry and so forth. I don't quite agree with that. I don't think most people are far right. Okay, I think we have far right political parties. I don't think most people are far right. When you speak to people, when it comes to, and again, you've got a small amount of people who absolutely are right. But I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of people that you can convince based on material conditions, because that's what people vote on most of the time.
But
So
also,
I don't think people vote reform because they want the far right. I think immigration, stop the boats, is obviously part of their appeal. But I think, why are people so alienated by the political establishment? It's because for 45 years, no one's lives have changed for the better, right? The leaving everything to the market, neoliberal economics has decimated this country. And when you have a situation where society basically collapses, where this social contract collapses, people move either to the left or to the right. Now, of course, mostly they move to the right. One, because they got very simple answers. Is they appeal to your emotions. Obviously, blaming immigrants makes you angry. It riles you up. It's very easy, right? It's very easy to get caught in that. And number two, capital. Capital will always back the far right over the left, because the far right doesn't threaten capital. And that's where you see it through the media, where you see it through political donations. But I don't think that if Reform wins the next general election, we're in a country where most people are far right, because you might as well just give up then.
But we also need to move away from this thought that because one particular party is winning lots of elections, that means most people want them.
Yeah.
Our electoral system is so fucking unfair that we end up in situations just like we did in July last year, where a small number of people can elect an entire government that have a landslide in terms of seats in Parliament. It happens the same at council levels as well. And like I mentioned this earlier, if you look at the results and if you look at where people have voted, the fact that Reform won Runcorn by 6 votes to Labour, that means that Labour got 6 votes less than Reform. That's almost 50-50. Once you tally in all the other 13 candidates that were also standing, that's significantly more votes for parties that were not Reform UK. People do not want reform in the masses. What's happened is what happened in the last general election, where people didn't particularly want Labour either, which is what we're also seeing now. In fact, these local elections actually prove what I think we all said on election night, which is that Labour didn't win the last election, the Conservatives lost it. There wasn't support for Labour. It's just the Tory vote crumbled. And the same thing's happened now, is that the Labour vote and the Tory votes crumbled. But it's not because a majority of people want reform. It's just the way our system works is that they're getting the right amount of number just to get over the threshold to win the seat.
What do you both think, Lewis and Cog, about this comment? Agree, disagree?
Yeah, no, I kind of agree. That data that you sent through the group chat a few days ago, do you remember it was talking about how, was it like 75% of Reform voters haven't voted for Labour in like 20 years or something? But
Yeah.
there was one part of the data that also said that most of these people were actually economically left in many ways. I feel like when it comes to the migration issue specifically, a lot of people have been taken down a far-right pipeline with that on that topic, and that's opened them up to some other things when it comes to, social things, whether it's trans stuff and all of that. That's a whole other conversation. But a lot of people are, in many ways, in this country, so economically left in lots of ways when it comes to nationalising things, when it comes to helping people, when it comes to the benefit system, NHS, all of these types of things. And I feel like I see why somebody might see a Reform voter and think that they themselves are far right. They are enabling the far right. They're letting it happen. They're supporting it. But I wouldn't necessarily paint every individual who votes for Reform far right as an individual themselves. I think it's a bit more complicated than that.
Cog?
Let me take you back a year-ish, just under a year, to June 2024. You had Rishi Sunak, then leader of the Conservative Party, really a lame duck after, coming in as super Rishi Sunak, the eat out to help out guy, literally represented as Superman by the BBC,
The
sort of
nice
seen as
BBC
quite a strong
propaganda
figure.
machine there.
By this time, a ghost of that man.
Yeah.
Very much viewed as sort of like, this is the death throes of this Conservative Party, this government that's ruled for 15 years. And you had Keir Starmer opposite him, who we all knew was a liar. We all knew was a blank question mark, and we were calling him out on it. But you had them standing opposite each other in front of the entire nation saying, no, I will get the boats to stop coming, because I think that we need to lower immigration even more than you do. And then it would hand back to the other one and go, no, I need you. I'm going to lower. I'm going to.
No, I'm going
bring the votes bring the votes down. Bring the votes down. Ironically, that is what they did. But bring the number of votes down. And I'm going to lower immigration. I'm going to lower net migration. It's and all of the time, Nigel Farage was sitting there, and this is how it links back to today. All of the time, Nigel Farage was sitting there going, "Thank you."
Yeah. 100%.
Because what you've done is effectively go, all of these social issues that we could be arguing out, Nigel Farage is right about them. Please vote for one of us two idiots instead. No, there's no way that was going to happen. This was always going to happen. And the thing about this as a comment is, like, if you look at those that voted, yeah, it looks like the far right are coming out swinging. But that's because people who don't believe that have become so disillusioned they've stopped engaging. And the belief that immigration is bad is growing, because you just had the two major parties for the last the people who represent the two major parties of the last 2 centuries come out and say Nigel Farage and Reform are correct about everything, we're not even going to bother fighting them. So of course we've ended up in a situation where it looks like Britain is more right-wing than it actually is.
I think that's a excellent analysis. Very, very true. I think that is solidifying the Overton window to the right, and of course the media is going to then move to the right and all this sort of stuff. So it's inevitable. I thought it was a really, really good analysis there. The world ain't what they said is, kids. Look at the new Pew research. The biggest thing is votes stated. They voted for Trump at 97%. Was the economy, immigration was in the low 80s. I think this is when we were talking about the US, when we were making comparisons, and it's absolutely true, right? You would think that, oh my God, everyone in America is far right. Okay, the people in power are far right, but again, there were many people who voted for Donald Trump in 2016 that voted for Obama twice. It's not as easy as that. And it's true. Most people pretty much all of the time votes on the economy, and they didn't have confidence in Biden and Kamala Harris. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that those 97% of people are social progressives or they didn't care. It confounds it or compounds it, right? So they might like what Trump is saying on social issues, right? I'm not denying that. I mean, I do think you have to be pretty bigoted to vote for Trump, right? What I'm saying is these people aren't too far gone where you can't convince them back on economic issues. And I think why Trump is effective, right, is what he does different to the Republicans. Yes, he talks about a lot of social issues, a lot of crap. But specifically in 2016, he did pretend to be a populist in terms of economics. He pretended to tack left to Hillary Clinton when it came to NAFTA and all these trade deals. I'm going to bring jobs back to America. That was the fundamental thing I personally think was at play.
Curtis, but you say about bringing these people back. Equate that back to the UK, replace Trump with Farage, and essentially it's what we've got now with Reform. How do we win those people back on economic policies? Because if it's how do we do it?
Well, you actually start talking about left-wing economic policies. No, I mean the Green Party doing it, but again, they're a small party.
But they think that anything left-wing is bad. They think these people already believe that Keir Starmer's a communist.
Yeah, but you don't. People look.
You don't label it as left.
Yeah,
though.
you don't label it as left. Like people don't think in terms of left and right. Typically, okay, that is why the Overton window changes, right? You could what was considered far left 40 years ago.
Yeah, but the right do though.
My point is that
it happened with Corbyn with the broadband communism thing, right? If Nigel Farage turned around tomorrow and said, "I'm going to give everybody free internet," they would lap it up.
Yeah.
But if somebody that Nigel Farage doesn't like, if the Greens did that or if Labour did that, Farage would label it as communism, and all the people that support him would say, "Oh no, communism bad. Oh, we can't have communism."
Okay, so why I disagree with that is, first of all, the only people that eat that up are core, Reform supporters. Like the average voter doesn't think that broadband is communism. You speak to people, they'll probably say we should have free broadband, right? It's not that the right's going to paint you the way they're going to paint you. But look at 2017, right? when the entire media, when the Conservatives were calling Jeremy Corbyn hard left, right? They called him hard left when he just ran for leader. So people had that in their minds, in their consciousness for 2 to 3 years. But when the bread and butter issues of nationalisation, ending privatisation, raising the minimum wage, free tuition fees, investment, when these things were put to the people,
They lost
suddenly
the election.
labels don't matter. They do not matter. So I don't really care if it's going to be labelled as hard left. The problem is the policies are not put toward the people.
And I'm just pushing back to play devil's advocate a bit here because I don't necessarily disagree with you. But Labour lost that election, and I know there's lots of arguments that we can have as to what was going on politically in 2017 and what Morgan McSweeney and co were doing behind the scenes. But the bottom line is that there must have been that attack line of the hard left, the communist, the socialist thing. That we can't say it didn't have an effect because it absolutely did. And what I'm interested in is how do we avoid the same thing happening this time around? How do we win those people
You
back?
need a good communicator. That's
So there's two things. First, I don't think that really had much of a big deal because when you look at the numbers, right, you got to think when you break down the numbers, the reason why Labour didn't win the election wasn't because they lost support or confidence. It's because the Conservative Party gained even more. Both political parties had record-breaking numbers. Labour got 40%, the Tories got 41%. Now, this was in an era when the two-party system was starting to break down. Obviously, there was a coalition just 7 years before. And that election was actually kind of different. That people sort of coalesced around the two main parties. So Labour didn't win simply because the Conservatives managed to increase their own vote share. But also, I don't think it's because it was particularly hard left. One was because there was so many splits behind the scenes. Another one was because, yes, the media attacks didn't help. But this is the thing, what Lewis is saying, it's about message. So if you say, look, we should have increases on taxes, right? And then Farage goes, well, that's far left. Well, you can say, well, of course Nigel Farage is going to say that. Nigel Farage is an ex-City banker. The Reform Party is bankrolled by the billionaires. So, of course, he's going to say it's hard left. But I'm speaking to you, voter at home. Do you think that having a wage which you can live on, right, one job that can pay for bills and rent and mortgage, do you think that's hard left? Do you think that having homeless people in our society is hard left? Do you think that millionaires and billionaires can get away with not paying any taxes whilst you've got a small business you're trying to start up and you've got to pay taxes, and if you don't, the police come knocking or HMRC comes knocking? Do you think that's hard left? And it's the way you sort of pivot that. That's what's important. Otherwise, there's no point in doing politics, right? Otherwise, we just say, well, politics isn't popular. There's no point.
But then do we need to break down this image of Nigel Farage as being the man of the people then? Because you can explain all that to them and they'll still say it's wrong. There was that video that we saw, I can't remember who it was, from one of the old elections of one of the political commentators going around putting policies to people and saying, do you like this policy? They all said yes.
Yeah.
When he revealed it was Corbyn's policies, immediately, oh no, I wouldn't vote for it. So even when they agree that the policy is
that's
good,
not your average voter, though. That is going to a specific, very Tory constituency who's always going to vote Tory.
But we're trying to appeal to people that are voting Reform, and if we've already said earlier on in the conversation that Reform are essentially looking set to replace the Conservative Party, we're still going to have that same problem.
Yeah, but as Lewis already proved, right, and the polls show, these people are economically on the left. They like the left-wing economic policies. There's a reason why Reform said they're going to back nationalisation of steel. There's a reason why Reform said they weren't going to cut the winter fuel payments. They weren't going to scrap the two-child benefit cap. Now, of course, I don't know if they're going to do it or not. They're probably full of shit. But there's a reason why they said that. So actually, most people's positions when it comes to the economy is left-wing. So it's not even about convincing people on economic policy. It's just about saying this is what we're offering. Like the most popular parts of the Labour Party, like in 2015, when they did a sort of a post-election analysis, right? They found that the more left-wing policies from the Labour Party was the most popular aspects. People loved nationalisation of the railways. So the point is, it's not even about really convincing people on left-wing policies. It's just saying that this is what we support and showing that the Reform Party are not offering these policies. They're going to blame everything on Stop the Boats, everything on immigration and wokeness. But how does that make your life better? Labour aren't offering that. That's why they're losing. The Greens are trying to offer that, but remember, they're a much smaller party. They don't have as much media coverage.
Do you think then that what it may, because I don't, and again I agree with what you're saying, but I'm really struggling to work out how we combat it. Lewis, you make a great point about communication, and I agree. I think particularly, we've already talked about the Green Party needs to sort out their communication. We've talked about that already, and other sort of left-wing parties and individuals and independents as well. But do we? I'm beginning to wonder whether we can actually change it and combat it, or whether we'd simply have to wait it out. We have to let it play its course. We have to obviously try and stop reform, but realistically, I think, I know you've already, Curtis, you've already sort of come to the conclusion.
Have a little fascism
reform are
phase.
gonna win. Go through that period where Nigel Farage is PM and people suffer horrendously as a result, and then people realize, oh yeah, actually it wasn't all sunshines and rainbows like we thought.
That can open the door for
Let's
something
go
even
back.
worse, though. That's the problem.
Yeah, the position
Because that scares
of,
me, but I worry that that's the only way to get.
But I
to
mean,
the
it's
inevitable.
almost immaterial whether you say, well, if we try, it doesn't work, or we wait it out, the result is the same. So you might as well try. So like, if we've got to, if it turns out that what we're doing and what politicians are doing is meaningless, we've just got to wait it out. Well, the result is the same whether you try or not. But if you do try, there's a higher percentage.
Oh God,
of
no, we've
changing
got
people's
to
minds.
try.
I'm
We've
not
got
saying
to
I'm
try.
not saying you're saying you shouldn't try,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that's in response to that. You just do it anyway, whether it's possible or not.
But is that what it's going? Is it going to take 5 years under a reform government for people to realise that actually what they're offering isn't going to work, and that we need to move back towards the left? Like,
Well,
is
they're
that
going
what
to
it's
win.
going to
I
take?
think they're going to win anyway. So that's. I think that's going to be the what's going to happen. And obviously, governments typically fall rather than. They go out of power not because necessarily the other party is really, really populous, because they typically fall. Sure, but
Let me
I think
rephrase-
we want to shape, but we want to
Okay.
shape the debate. So like, if reform falls in 5 years' time,
Yeah.
us as turn left, the Green Party, and anyone else on the left want to be there when reform falls, and not people saying reform are shit, we need to go even more right wing. But we're there because the last 5 years we've been pushing the left wing message. Reform falls, and people go, maybe try the left for a change.
Okay, let me
It
rephrase
matters-
the question then, and
Yeah.
and I want to put this to Cog as well if I can, because I think he's been waiting to get in. But okay, so what do we on the left need to do then, or what can we do to soften the blow? Because if we're consigned to the idea that reform are inevitably going to win the next election, and absolutely we need to try and stop that. But if that's inevitable, and if that's coming down the tracks, what can we do, and what can we start doing now to make sure that as small a group of people as possible are adversely affected by this? Because I dread to
I have the
think
answer.
what would happen. Go on then.
The best scenario for the next election is for a coalition government. Right now, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens are obviously on the left to Labour. The only thing that would soften the blow from things getting worse, as opposed to reform getting in, would be for one of these parties to go into a coalition, or who knows, all three. When you actually do the maths, and I did this because I'm weird, when you actually take into
In the spreadsheet.
consideration... When you take into consideration the amount of people who voted Reform instead of Conservative, in terms of like the polling of like who would you have voted for instead, if you do the maths in lots of different ways, you can't always predict it. But Labour would have only ended up with around 200, I think it's like 250 seats ish. And when you even add the current Lib Dems onto that, that still wouldn't actually give them a majority if Lib Dems still got their seats. So they would have actually been forced to go into like a three-way coalition, perhaps. So the best thing that can happen in the next election is they're forced into a coalition, and they're forced to bring in some policies from either of these two parties or both of them, because obviously Labour are in a terrible direction. Obviously, in a perfect world, we'd have a lovely left-wing socialist party come in out of nowhere, and everything would be great and wonderful. But we know it's not going to happen. But
Do you think that's more likely than a
okay to not vote
reform?
for one of the big parties? You don't have to be tied to the system. That's the message.
Do you
Vote
think?
for who you
Do you
want
think
to
that?
vote for.
Sorry, Lewis. Do you think that's more likely than an out reform win at the next election?
Personally, unless the Conservative Party actually either give in, collapse, or merge, or flee to reform, if they keep going, I don't think either of those two parties can get a majority. That's my personal opinion. But
Hope
it all
so.
depends on if any of those other things could happen. Then yes, reform could win. But if the Tories keep going and try and keep the Tory party together, that will, in my opinion, squarely split the vote. So neither of them could get a majority. But then you could end up with a Tory reform coalition.
Lib coalition, maybe.
I think it'll end. Personally, yeah, that's my prediction. But again, 4 years away, it's really terrible to make
Yeah.
4-year away predictions.
Yeah. Sorry,
Literally
I
anything
shouldn't put that on to you.
could
It's the
happen.
political commentator's worst nightmare.
I don't think that there is a with regards to accelerationism. I don't think that there is a point. I think it's unfortunately a bit of a red herring for people on the left, because I think in terms of accelerationism, fascism just eventually ends up eating itself and destroying
Yeah.
itself, and it doesn't reach a point where people go, "Oh, that was actually a really bad idea." It just gets worse and worse and worse. And I really do think that we need to be careful about the idea of like encouraging acceleration, but that's not quite the same as going, no, actually, if Labour don't support us, we will go to another party. I have 3 suggestions. And it's this is sort of showing people behind the scenes a little bit, because they're things that I've been thinking about us doing as creators. I think that they're things that left-wing leaders, including the Green leaders, need to be thinking about right now. I think they need to be taking classes on improvisation, on improvised acting. I'm talking about working with actual actors to improve their improvisation skills, and media trainers as well, improve their media training skills.
Like
I'm aware these
Starmer
things,
with his voice coach.
I'm aware these things are very expensive, but the other things they need to be doing are looking at visualization, memorization. I don't want to see politicians who have to look at notes like the classic example of a politician, who speaks to you like this, looks up, speaks to you like this, looks up. I want to see them doing it with no notes, because I want them to be able to memorize that. And there's techniques they can use to do this, but the importance of it is not, you don't memorize a speech. You don't memorize it line by line. As people who watched the last show will know, it is very difficult to memorize things line by line.
You did very well, Cog. You did very well.
If you are improvising around a series of images in your head, you do much, much better. Like, that is sort of rhetoric 101, because you're improvising around these series of images. You can hold on to images a lot better than you can to words. And it allows your speaking style to be more fluid. And speaking style is the final thing that I'd recommend, is because I'm trying to give direct rhetorical advice to these people, is learn how to tell a story in a way that keeps people engaged, right? Look at the best storytellers in the world, and storytelling itself is an art form. It really is an art form in itself. You listen to somebody who's like studied storytelling, for oral storytelling, for like 20 years, and the way they tell a story, you can picture it in front of you. They draw you in with the things they say, and that is exactly how the Greens need to be selling their message. It's how the left as a whole needs to be selling its message, because that is what will get people off their sofas and out the doors, because the people that they're trying to win over are not the Reform voters. They're not the ones you need to win over. Some of the seats that they were contesting this time had turnouts of like 29%, like a total vote turnout of 29%. We need to be persuading people off the sofa and to the voting booth, and the only way you can do that is if you can sell them a convincing narrative. I've forgotten what the original question was.
I mean, I think Becca A has the answer.
Go on, Becca.
The Spice Boys, Daily, Gaily, Cog, and Green Spice. Sorry, Cog, I couldn't think of a better Spice name. Could you not say Coggy? At least Daily, Gaily, Coggy, and Green Spice. And Becca, you spelt my last name wrong. It's okay. It's not on today, but every show my name's on there. Why are you not observing these things?
Call yourself a supporter. Honestly.
So what we need is
Gaily.
We need left. Left
Dear
Spice Gals
dear,
or Spice Boys. Cog, you've given some really good advice there. Communication is everything. That is politics. And look, let's be honest. Nigel Farage is gifted, right? Some people are born this way. Some people have that gift of the gaffe. You seem to see it more with right-wing politicians than left-wing politicians. I would love to someone to study that. Maybe there's some psychology behind it. I don't know. But you do seem to have more charismatic people on the right. But equally, you have some really uncharismatic people on the right, two who think they're charismatic. I don't know, like Elon Musk. But there isn't that many charismatic people on the left. But yes, I don't see why people can't learn. I mean, we haven't got a choice. We have to.
I think they're charismatic though because what they're saying is nonsense. Have you seen the clips of Donald Trump where they dub his voice with the voice of a toddler? And it sounds like a toddler speaking because the way he speaks is like a child. But because what he's saying is he forms his sentences in the way a child would. But because he does it in his Donald Trumpy way, he somehow has. I mean, I'm not saying that Trump's got the same level of charisma as Nigel Farage. I mean, he hasn't. But I feel like there's something in that. If it's not, if you're actually trying to say a really serious thing and really get down into the detail of it and the nitty-gritty of whatever it is that you're talking about, that you immediately sound more boring and less engaging. Whereas when you say, stop the boats, China, build a
story,
lock her up. They go.
These 3-word slogans is the story.
Strong and stable.
Stop the boats. I mean, strong and stable didn't go very well, but
chaos with Ed Miliband.
Stop the boats, lock them up. All these slogans, and which is why I think a lot of lessons need to be taught from the 2017 election. Okay, Jeremy Corbyn, I think he's a very good campaigner. By the way, he might not be the best political orator of all time. But that almost didn't matter because he was at least authentic. But what was really good, that message of the campaign, for the many, not the few. Like that slogan, you instantly know what it means. For the many, not the few. And it worked with the policies and it worked with the message. That is what the left need to do. It's not just one political party now. It's not just the Greens need to adopt this message. I think it needs to be the Greens, it needs to be trade unions, it needs to be commentators. That's why when you hear Gary Stevenson saying tax wealth not work, I repeat that line, okay? I was on GB News the other day and I literally said verbatim, tax wealth not work. It's not my own line, but I did it because someone watching might go, I heard that somewhere else. Oh, that's a good slogan. So I think actually the left broadly needs to work in coalition together, whether you're a part of the Greens or not, and we basically say, we have an economy that works for the billionaire class. If you're hearing it from multiple places and you're hearing it all the time, then I think that's going to be the effective thing.
I spent 2 minutes talking to a guy the other day who was against wealth tax, against inheritance tax, and within 2 minutes I had him on board immediately. Just quick 2 minute conversation. Well done. You've won the game of Monopoly in this system. Now it's time to pay the system back a little bit. Simple as that. 4% of people are affected by it. Short, simple conversations on topics like this, on any topic really, can be changed with the right communicator. And I'm not trying to say I'm the right communicator.
Yeah,
on certain topics,
true.
I'm absolutely terrible, but I know what I'm good at.
I'll give yourself more credit there, Lewis. Come on.
I want to highlight this not just because my pal Foot gave us £5. Thank you very much, my pal. But just what he said is absolutely. Need to be inclusive. Can't assume gender, can we? Don't say what's popular, but make it popular what needs to be said.
Yeah, very good. I like that a lot.
It's very
good.
Like that. I am going to use that. Thank you very much.
And do you know what? That's what separates you from a weather vane and a signpost. It's what Tony Benn used to say, and Starmer will say what he thinks is popular. I mean, they're that bad now that they're saying things that aren't popular, but that is the political establishment. They try and say things that they think is popular, but yeah, make what you're saying is popular.
We've actually had some more donations. We missed one earlier.
We did?
1 second. So obviously we had Zach's amazing 50. We also
Zeke
got
the Beast.
Zeke the Beast.
So I think we had Les just dropped us in.
Oh, wow.
Thanks, Les.
My condition was in. Edward Vicky Becker. Thank you very much,
Les.
And obviously we did my pal just now, and then Vicky's just dropped this for us as well.
Wow.
Thanks.
Thank you, Vicky.
Do you want
to
to
read
right
out the
when
comment?
people don't care about exact truth, whereas lefties agonize about being accurate and can be shamed by and be shamed by being wrong. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the response isn't to lie, but the response is, I think, to shorten our arguments, make it less complicated.
We are our own worst enemy, though. We hold, and I think we
We
do
do,
as
don't
well,
we? Yeah.
where we hold other left-wing politicians, creators to sometimes to a higher standard. I think we're getting better at it. I'm trying to get better at it, but it's definitely a problem that the left have generally.
Yeah.
I think
And this is happening in the States too right now, because I'm very much an American talk. There is still a massive faction of the left who thinks that Bernie and AOC are not left enough. They're not pro Gaza enough. And
I mean, I do
these
think
videos
that-
are getting hundreds of thousands of
To be
likes.
fair, I do think that Bernie is kind of shit on Israel. Having said that, he's not the same as Joe Biden. He's not the
Yeah.
same as Donald Trump. And I desperately wanted him to be president. I think that AOC, I think she's largely still very good. I mean, she did say that Biden and Kamala Harris were doing everything they can for a ceasefire. It turns out that Biden didn't even bother. Either she didn't know or she was kind of lying. But having said that, I think the difference is having criticisms of your leaders and not just turning your back on them and saying, well, look, I know Gaza's not a fringe issue and it's not like an issue you can say, oh, whatever. Obviously, it's really important. But for me, I would love AOC to be president. Better than any corporate Democrat, at least.
Yeah.
So I hear what you're saying. There is, I don't know if that's just more of an online phenomenon. I think a lot of people do kind of play that up. I don't know if we want to do that, but yeah.
Thanks, Vicky.
I think that is it for our comments, unless you've seen any other donations.
My pal is a lovely he/him.
Excellent. Thank you very much, my pal. For it's 10 o'clock. That's a 2-hour show. We probably should leave it there, I think. Okay. Want to thank everyone on the panel for coming in. A 4-way panel. We don't usually do that. It was a lot of fun, though. It's a special election coverage. I want to thank everyone tonight, especially those who donated. Really generous crowd tonight, actually. So very much appreciate that. Your donations go so far. We have already done so many things thanks to you. We've done some brilliant Vox Pops. We've gone down to London multiple times. You know, we have to pay to get there, to do some documentaries and to do some interviews. All of that is because of you, and I can't thank you enough. But if you did want to support us, you can go to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There, you can support us with a monthly donation via our Patreon, or you can give us a one-off donation. There's another link there to the website. Alternatively, you can support us for 99p as a YouTube member. Of course, you can gift other people. But what matters the most is your support, whether it's financial or whether it's just you watching. We've had, once again, a really good show tonight. 120 people concurrently watching on YouTube. So that's been very, very good. Please like the stream, share it, comment. You know that stuff. The YouTube algorithm loves it. Vicky says do a call-in show. Maybe, but I could just envision, it being the right stuff, and someone calling up saying some things. Okay, I think Helena's actually about to start. So, friend of the show, go watch her now. Thank you so much for being with us for 2 hours. It's a long show. We're gonna have a nice weekend, and we will see you next time.